Thank you for attending the substance abuse education group number one. This is part of the Phoenix program here at Dayspring Village. We are hoping that this will be a very educational and great opportunity for you to engage with your peers and with others as we talk about substance abuse and you. So let's get started. The Phoenix program is a step-down program for those who have been involved in Florida's forensic mental health system. This is an opportunity to make progress towards graduating and moving forward in the process. Part of our goals are to increase awareness of substance abuse education and certainly how it affects you. The identification of how drugs affect the brain is very, very important, and also helping improve insight into the triggers that trigger cravings and other types of things that result in relapse or result in continued use of illegal drugs in your life. So let's talk about what is substance abuse. Substance abuse is certainly something where the brain gets addicted to all sorts of things. But typically, you'll find that it is really centered around dopamine or a depleted dopamine brain or being deprived of dopamine. And so they will start to feel irritable, bored. These are people that are dopamine depleted or dopamine deprived. This is a very, very important component that drives substance abuse in individuals, and certainly is something that we'll talk more about later during our discussion period. So this is my friend John Kersey. John was a resident at Dayspring Village for a long time, and John had a very, very interesting history. But John got well. He did much better, and of course, John's no longer with us. He passed away some time ago. So a big question that you need to ask yourself is, do you suffer from anhedonia? And so a lot of people have asked me, what is anhedonia? Well, very simply, anhedonia is the inability to experience pleasure in normally pleasurable acts, social withdrawals, lack of relationships, difficulty adjusting to social situations. These people tend towards showing fake emotions. So, for instance, when you ask them, well, how are you feeling? Are you happy? Are you sad? They'll sort of indicate emotions that don't really reflect how they truly feel inside. These are folks who are often complain of feeling physically sick. And so, again, anhedonia is really an important part of symptom identification when dealing with substance abuse. And we'll talk a little bit more about this later. So do you feel that you suffer from anhedonia? That'll be a question we'll talk about at the end. So when was the last time you experienced cravings? Cravings are an important trigger that sort of lead up to relapse and continued use of illegal narcotics. And so you have to look at what is the intensity of the cravings? How frequently do you have the cravings? What's the length of time you have the cravings? What are the number of times during the course of, say, the last month or the last week that you've been experiencing cravings? Cravings have a pretty large impact on telling us when and to what extent you will start to experience an increase in symptoms related to substance abuse. So it's important to identify cravings. It's important to report them to your case manager, to your therapist, also to the staff there at the Phoenix program at Dayspring Village. So what we know about substance abuse is cognitive impairment. Do you suffer from cognitive impairment? This is a very important subject. It really sort of helps define, again, another trigger that would suggest, yes, there's a potential risk of relapse, that cognitive impairment seems to be on the rise. So, for instance, can you count to 20? Can you count backwards from 100 by sevens? Can you spell the word shade backwards? Can you do simple math such as 8 plus 12 plus 3 is? Can you pay attention? These are all very, very simple tests, very simple exercises. You should write these down and later on go back to your room and certainly ask yourself these questions, whether or not you believe that you are suffering from cognitive impairment. So we'll talk more about this at the end during our discussion period with the staff, so you can be thinking about it as we get closer to the end of this program. So when you're thinking about substance abuse, you have to ask yourself the question, is the drug use compulsive? In other words, there is a brain change that happens. The brain literally rewires itself. And when there is addiction happening up in the brain loves to gets addicted to almost everything and anything. The brain loves habits and routines, and certainly drugs are no different. But the big thing with drugs is drugs don't miss. Drugs are very accurate. They hit the pleasure reward part of the brain consistently, recurringly. They just simply never miss. So you have to ask yourself some of these questions. Have you ever overdosed before? How many times have you witnessed an overdose? Have you experienced a withdrawal? These are all key questions that we want you to think about while we go through this program today. And we're going to talk about them during our discussion time here at the end with the staff. As we talk about accurate assessments is absolutely critical to getting good quality treatment plans. And so one of the things that has to happen is assessments are based upon your symptoms. How are you feeling? Some of the questions we talked about earlier in this presentation today, kind of spoke to some of those issues. So accurate assessment is really important to you as you are starting to move towards the path towards a recovery. It's estimated that 85% of those in the criminal justice system have never received an accurate diagnosis. Most of the diagnosis was done on clinical impression. You need to ask for the use of an accurate assessment to get an accurate diagnosis. It's estimated that 14% of those with substance abuse problems in the criminal justice system never received the diagnosis that does not exist. For instance, polysubstance abuse dependence is not a diagnosis. Have you ever been diagnosed with polysubstance abuse as a diagnosis? You need to question that. Is the substance abuse substantially compulsive or willful? Was it a result of cravings, withdrawal, or compulsion? Was it a willful act? These are key questions that we're going to look at in terms of developing accurate treatment plans and accurate assessments to help you move towards recovery and help you live a drug-free life. So here we are at treatment planning. This is very, very important. Once we have the assessment, in other words, once we have the facts, we then move into the treatment planning process. So we must have a diagnosis that comes from a competent assessment. Does the person need medication to treat the symptoms associated with the substance abuse issues? Yes or no? Are the medications needed? Need to review the ASMAN patient placement criteria, medical treatment or monitored care. It's estimated that 10% of patients have never received this assessment. This is an important assessment to look at. Informed consent is important. What are the material facts related to treatment? What are the risks and what are the benefits of treatment? These are questions that you need to be asking your treatment professional. The odds of drug-free counseling are less. The odds of in drug-free counseling are less than 5%. The odds of success with medication is much higher. So clearly, when you're using medication to help treat the symptoms of drug addiction or drug abuse, clearly you have a much greater likelihood of success than when not using these approaches. So this is my friend John Bruce. John was a longtime resident at Day Spring Village, and his father served as a judge down in Jacksonville. So one of the things about drug use and certainly drug addiction is how dopamine is affected. And certainly too much dopamine in the brain causes delusions. So you have different kinds of delusions. Let's talk about those for a minute. You have bizarre delusions. This is when things don't make sense to anyone except them. So, you can have things that don't make any sense to everybody else, but it makes sense to the person who's experiencing the bizarre delusion. Non-bizarre delusions are things, for instance, I may feel like I'm under police supervision. This is something that could actually happen. But again, it's a non-bizarre delusion. In other words, the police really are not supervising you, but this becomes a belief that person has. Mood congruent delusion is something along this line. The news anchor is mad at the person and disapproves of the person. So this is where you're watching TV, the person believes that the person on TV knows them, has an interaction with them, has a relationship with them. But again, this is a mood congruent delusion. It's estimated 3% of people deal with these delusions throughout the nation. They believe that their mind can be read by others. These are, again, all as a result of too much dopamine in the brain, which, again, regulating dopamine in the brain is really important when we're thinking about mental health, when we're thinking about wellness, and when we're thinking about recovery and graduating from the Phoenix program here at Dayspring Village. So now we're at the most important part of today's group. The staff is going to facilitate with you some discussion time. This is a chance for you to participate and to provide feedback to one another and also to the staff. But this is, we're going to spend a few short minutes. We're not taking up a lot of time. We're going to spend a few short minutes to talk about whether or not you have questions. Have you had cravings before? Do you believe you have ever had an accurate substance abuse assessment? I want you to be truthful about that because we really want to make sure we get this right. Have you ever been treated with medication for your substance abuse issues? That's a yes or no. And maybe you don't know, and it's okay to kind of put down, I don't know. What do you do to refrain from using drugs and alcohol and other things that impact your life in a negative way? That's a pretty big subject area. I want you to have a conversation. You can feel free to talk with the staff either as part of the group today, or if you want to talk to the staff privately, you can do that as well. So let's get started with our discussion time as we talk about substance abuse. Thank you so much for attending today. We appreciate your participation here at the Phoenix program with the Substance Abuse Education Group. It's important that you participate and that you be involved in these groups. We hope that you find them educational, rewarding, and an opportunity to interact with your peers as well as the staff. Again, being truthful and honest and straightforward about your symptoms is really the starting point for your recovery. And certainly we want to see everybody here at the Phoenix program be successful as we move towards graduation and becoming a part of the community and making sure that you can live a drug-free life.